Bodies.
Imagine for a moment stepping out onto a Parisian street in the year 1650. The air, thick and heavy, assaults your senses immediately. Your very first instinct, the most crucial lesson you'd learn within moments, would be to look down. Not at the intricate architecture, not at the bustling crowds, but at the ground beneath your feet. The streets are not paved in the smooth, clean way we know them today. They are narrow, often unpaved, uneven stretches of mud, cobblestones, and something far more insidious. What flows in the open channels that crisscross these thoroughfares isn't merely rainwater. It's a viscous, foul-smelling cocktail of human and animal waste, kitchen refuse, and the accumulated detritus of daily life. Between the tall, cramped houses, leaning precariously towards each other, the city breathes, lives, and, most visibly, discards its waste. This is Paris, the city of lights. But in the early modern age, it was a city steeped in shadows and an overwhelming stench. Before we delve deeper into this fascinating, albeit grimy past, consider subscribing to the channel if you appreciate documentaries that unearth the forgotten realities of how our cities functioned before the advent of modern sanitation. And please, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Paris, in 1650, was a city still largely confined within its ancient walls. These formidable barriers, built centuries earlier for defense, now served a different purpose. They choked the city. The population of Paris was growing at an astonishing rate, a vibrant, ceaseless tide of humanity drawn to its opportunities and its status as a cultural and intellectual hub. Yet, the physical space available for this burgeoning population remained static, trapped within those very same historical boundaries. The result was an unprecedented level of urban density. Houses didn't just grow outwards, they grew upwards, often adding multiple stories, sometimes even overhanging the street below, further diminishing natural light and airflow. The streets, already narrow by design, became even more constricted, dark and airless canyons between towering structures. Ventilation was minimal, allowing the pervasive odors to linger and intensify. This extreme proximity of living and working spaces, combined with the sheer volume of people, created a perfect storm for waste accumulation. Every individual, every household, every workshop generated refuse, and without a sophisticated system for its removal, it inevitably ended up in the most convenient place: the streets. The ancient walls, once symbols of protection, now felt like a suffocating embrace, trapping not just people, but also the consequences of their collective existence. This high urban density wasn't merely an inconvenience, it was the primary amplifier of the city's waste problems, turning what might have been manageable refuse into an overwhelming, ever-present torrent of filth. The stage was set for an almost unbelievable daily struggle against the very environment the Parisians themselves created. The city was a living, breathing entity, but one that was constantly struggling to process its own bodily functions, leaving its inhabitants to navigate a landscape that was both magnificent in its aspirations and appallingly squalid in its reality. This daily struggle was perhaps most vividly illustrated by one of the most common and profoundly unsanitary practices of the era: window disposal. In a city where indoor plumbing was a luxury virtually non-existent for the vast majority, and municipal waste collection was a haphazard, often non-existent affair, residents resorted to the simplest, most immediate solution for their domestic refuse and human waste. From the upper floors of those towering, cramped buildings, chamber pots and buckets filled with household garbage were routinely emptied directly into the street below. Often, this act was preceded by a perfunctory verbal warning, a shout of "Gardez l'eau," or "Watch out for the water," and been intended to alert unsuspecting pedestrians. However, such warnings were not always given, or sometimes they simply came too late. Imagine the scene. You're navigating the already treacherous streets, eyes scanning for solid ground, when suddenly a cascade of liquid waste, perhaps mixed with kitchen scraps, splashes down from above. This wasn't a rare occurrence. It was a daily, hourly reality for anyone traversing the Parisian thoroughfares. The waste, once airborne, would then flow down the uneven surfaces of the street, eventually finding its way into the open gutters that ran down the center or sides. These gutters, far from being engineered drains, were merely natural depressions or crudely dug channels, acting as the city's improvised open sewers. On dry days, the putrid mixture would coagulate, festering and emitting an unbearable stench that clung to clothing and skin, permeating every corner of the urban environment. On rainy days, however, the problem transformed. The downpour would transform the stagnant sludge into a flowing river of filth, actively spreading the contamination further, carrying its noxious contents throughout the lower parts of the city and into any accessible waterway. The very air was a tapestry of odors, a constant reminder of the city's struggle with its own waste. And where did much of this liquid waste ultimately flow? Into the lifeblood of Paris itself, the river Seine. The Seine was more than just a river. It was the city's artery, vital for commerce, transport, and crucially, for its water supply. Boats laden with goods plied its waters, ferries transported people, and countless workshops along its banks relied on it for their operations. But the Seine also served as the ultimate, unfiltered receptacle for the city's refuse. Domestic waste from the window disposals, animal carcasses from butchers and tanneries, industrial effluents from various workshops, all found their way into its waters. Latrines from houses and public facilities often emptied directly into the river. The irony and the tragic reality was that the very same river that received this overwhelming discharge was also the primary source of drinking water for the Parisians. Water carriers, known as porteurs d'eau, would draw water directly from the Seine, often from sections downstream from major waste outlets, and deliver it to households. The contamination was undeniable, visible, and palpable, yet the understanding of its direct link to disease was limited. While some recognized that foul water could cause illness, the precise microbial mechanisms were unknown. People drank the very water that had been a conduit for the city's filth, a cycle of pollution and consumption that inevitably led to widespread outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and other waterborne diseases. The Seine, a symbol of Parisian beauty and vitality, was simultaneously its largest open sewer and its most dangerous wellspring. Given this environmental context, it's perhaps unsurprising that personal hygiene, as we understand it today, was a vastly different concept. Full-body baths were a rare luxury, often associated with medicinal purposes rather than daily cleanliness. There was a prevailing belief, rooted in medical theories of the time, that excessive washing, particularly with hot water, could open the pores and weaken the body, making it more susceptible to illness. Consequently, regular bathing was not a widespread practice. Instead, cleanliness was often a matter of appearance and masking. Outer clothing might be changed more frequently than individuals bathed, presenting an outward facade of respectability. To combat the pervasive odors of the city and the body, perfumes, pomanders, and fragrant herbs were indispensable tools. Men and women alike would douse themselves in strong scents, carry sachets of dried flowers, or even hold scented handkerchiefs to their noses when venturing outdoors or into crowded spaces. The goal was not to eliminate the source of the smell, but to overpower it, to create a perfumed barrier against the prevailing stench. This approach to hygiene was partial, superficial, and largely ineffective against the underlying health threats. The result was a city that, despite its intellectual and cultural aspirations, maintained a pervasive, multi-layered olfactory background, a complex blend of human and animal waste, decaying organic matter, unwashed bodies, and the cloying sweetness of perfumes, all mingling to create an unforgettable and often nauseating sensory experience that was an intrinsic part of 17th century Parisian life. Despite the overwhelming reality of the city's unsanitary conditions, it wasn't for lack of effort that Paris remained so profoundly dirty. Municipal authorities, albeit with limited resources and understanding, did attempt to implement various rules and regulations aimed at controlling the burgeoning filth. Edicts were periodically issued, dictating specific times for waste disposal, often restricting it to certain hours of the night or early morning to minimize direct interaction with pedestrians. Fines were stipulated for those caught accumulating waste in front of their properties or for neglecting to clean their immediate surroundings. There were even attempts at more organized, albeit infrequent, cleaning of the main gutters, often involving laborers with shovels attempting to clear the worst of the sludge. However, enforcement of these ordinances was notoriously inconsistent. The sheer volume of waste, generated by a rapidly growing population, coupled with the logistical challenges of a pre-industrial city, meant that the city's capacity for organization simply couldn't keep pace with its expansion. Urban order, particularly concerning sanitation, remained fragile, a constant battle against an ever-renewing tide of refuse. These efforts, though well-intentioned, were often overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, leaving the streets to their familiar, putrid state. The stark contrast in living conditions across Paris further highlighted the city's struggle. In the poorer neighborhoods, the situation was even more severe, if that were imaginable. These areas were characterized by extreme overcrowding, with multiple families often sharing single rooms in dilapidated buildings. It wasn't uncommon for people to share their cramped living spaces with livestock, chickens, pigs, or goats, whose waste further exacerbated the unhygienic conditions indoors. Ventilation was virtually non-existent, trapping foul air and the stench of decay within these suffocating confines. Predictably, these were the breeding grounds for disease. Plagues, dysentery, and typhus swept through these districts with devastating regularity, claiming lives indiscriminately. For the inhabitants of these impoverished areas, the concept of ideal hygiene was a distant, unattainable luxury. Their daily lives were dominated by the more immediate, primal concerns of survival, finding work, securing enough food to stave off hunger, and simply enduring another day in an environment that seemed actively hostile to their well-being. Cleanliness, in such circumstances, was a secondary concern, overshadowed by the relentless demands of existence. This Paris of 1650 presents a profound and fascinating contradiction. On one hand, it was a city steeped in the pervasive squalor we've described, a place where the physical reality of daily life was often repugnant. Yet simultaneously, this was a vibrant intellectual center, a crucible of thought and innovation. Paris was home to renowned universities, where scholars debated philosophy, theology, and the emerging sciences. It was a hub for artists, writers, and thinkers, a place where new ideas were forged and disseminated, laying the groundwork for the Enlightenment. This cultural flourishing, this intellectual modernity, coexisted directly with the unsanitary streets, the open sewers, and the pervasive reek of human and animal waste. It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't always linear or holistic. Intellectual advancement can, and often does, precede practical, infrastructural improvements. The human mind was reaching for the stars, while human feet navigated a landscape of excrement. Looking beyond 1650, it would be decades, even centuries, before significant urban reforms truly began to transform Paris. The vision of a cleaner, healthier city would eventually lead to monumental projects, improved drainage systems, the the widening of narrow medieval streets into grand boulevards, and a fundamental shift in public perception, where hygiene became a recognized priority for public health. But in that mid-17th century moment, Paris lived in a precarious and unstable balance. It was a city caught between its rapid growth and its inherent disorder, a place where sophisticated culture thrived amidst rampant contamination. The reality experienced on its very ground level, for the vast majority of its inhabitants, was undeniably clear. The grand ideals of modernity had not yet trickled down to touch the dirty, crowded streets. If you found yourself captivated by these hidden, gritty realities of urban life before modern sanitation, and curious about how cities evolved from this chaos into the organized, cleaner spaces we know today, then please consider subscribing to our channel. There are countless more stories beneath the streets of history waiting to be uncovered.